So this session today is how and when to use behavioral nudges to drive quote-to-cash outcomes. Think of it kind of like if you dressed for the sun, but the weatherman calls for rain, it's like, uh-oh, how do I figure this out so that I can deal with the temperatures? So by way of introductions, my name is Jason Lowe. I am the general manager of the incentives portfolio here at Apttus. Prior to Apttus, I spent about a dozen years where I was the GM at Oracle, in charge of all their incentive products, the Siebel products, the PeopleSoft products, the EBS, the Fusion Cloud products. Done it at SAP, so I've spent my entire career in the incentive space and trying to find ways to motivate people to push their boundaries. I'm joined today by Pablo Dominguez. Pablo is the Vice President of Global Business Operations at AppNexus. Prior to AppNexus, he spent significant time at ADP, where he was responsible for a sales organization and augmenting the behaviors of over 8,000 people. And then before that, he spent time at Avaya. And then he started off his career as a strategy consultant at the Alexander Group, which is an organization that's designed to come in and work with companies to augment and change their behaviors. The first question is, why did I just tell you guys who we are? Right now, the first thing is, look, there are a lot of sessions out there right now, and you kind of want to be validated to say, I picked the right session, and the guys that are talking actually know what they're going to be talking about. The second reason why I did it is, candidly, I'm kind of the lead story in my own life, right? And you guys are the lead stories in your lives, and right now, to you, I'm a secondary character, and then later, I'm like a Hollywood background guy as you're going on your journey for the rest of the day, right? And that's human nature. And there's studies out there that just say, you know what? In life, there are no major or minor characters. Everyone is the hero of their own story. And so why do I talk about that? So as the hero of our own story, where we're always the good guy, we're never the villain, there's always a bias to us. There's a bias from a perspective because we're always looking at the world from the prism that we live in, or the prism that we look through. And so to illustrate this a little bit, so as we're all aware, we came off a very tumultuous presidential election recently, and this last weekend, we celebrated the first 100 days. Now, proponents of the new president have been saying that other people have said that this has been the most successful 100 days, more than anybody in modern American history. And then opponents have said, well, a famous historian said this is the most failed 100 days. And it's really about perspective. And it's about, as the main characters in our own stories and looking at things, it depends on how we look at it in order to understand our point of view. So this comes down to the idea of bias, right? And bias isn't a bad thing, it's part of human nature. And one of the things, if you've attended some of our other sessions that I've been doing, we talk a lot about behavioral economics, those things that motivate people to make certain decisions. Why at the beginning of every calendar year, we put together New Year's resolutions that I'm gonna eat better and lose more weight and go to the gym more. And there's no doubt when I make that resolution, I have every intent that I'm gonna do it. But my understanding is, well, human nature takes effect and I find other things to do. And so the challenge that we have as an organization is that these personal biases that we have follow us into our professional lives. And so how, as organizations, as part of the quote-to-cash process, how do we augment the behaviors of people in order to remove the biases? And so the first thing we need to do is we need to identify what the biases are and how to mitigate those. And so there are two primary tools within an organization to mitigate bias. The first thing is predictive analytics. Now, predictive analytics, think of machine learning, think of big data, think of algorithms. And what this is this allows us to correct for mental biases. I expect that sales are going to be increasing at a certain rate, but then I can take the bias away from that and just look at the data to understand how things are performing. The other element I need to do is to introduce behavioral insights. And there's always a common battle that we're always challenged because we need to augment the present bias. And this goes back to our New Year's resolutions. These are our short-term desires because a lot of times we'll make short-term decisions that are in the detriment of our long-term goals. So the two tools that we have are predictive analytics to look at the data scientifically, as well as understand what can we do to weigh out the present biases against future biases. And so going to the studies of where data science meets behavioral science, in the world of data science is the idea that past performance is indicative of future results, right? We've heard this when we sign up on financial disclosures. And the idea for this is, look, I'm going to look at the historical data, I'm going to look at the trends, I'm going to look at the variables, and based on that, I'm going to teach it through algorithms and learn through it, and I'm going to augment to be able to predict what's going to happen. It's a concept called moneyballing, and it is applying data analytics in order to make more economically efficient decisions, both in business as well as in other parts of life. The other idea we borrow from the concepts of behavioral economics. This is the idea of the nudging. And this is like, how do I incent someone, or how do I motivate someone to try a little bit harder or to focus on something specifically? And it's the idea of applying these nudges in order to prompt people to make decisions that are not only in their own best interest, but in the best interests of the organization. And it's the marriage of data science and behavioral economics that allows us to understand what these nudges should be in order to drive behaviors. So to illustrate this a little bit, let's pretend that we are the sales organization at some company. And as the sales organization, we meet with our leadership team. And our leadership team says, you know what? Sales have been going great. They continue to go great. Everyone wants our products, and we expect an upward trajectory as depicted by this slope here of the expectations. And this is great. This is the expectations of senior leadership. It sounds all well and good. The challenge is that if I start analyzing the data, I might see, you know what, in the beginning, I'm tracking pretty well to expectations. Sometimes I'm a little bit better, sometimes I'm a little bit worse, but I'm following pretty well. Then what happens around Q3, what the data tells us, based on past performance is indicative of future results, is we're gonna hit a slump. Well, just because it's the whole happy years idea that, look, the data says we're gonna hit a slump, but senior leadership says, no, we're gonna keep going. But it's based on their mental biases that they have a feeling it's going to continue, but the data doesn't match that. And so what happens is that in some instances, when you start deviating a little bit, right? So in the very beginning, when the two lines start spreading apart from expectations and reality, the beginning, it might be an acceptable gap. It might just be something that's happening, and it might just be a change in market conditions, and it might be tweaked, and that might be something that's acceptable to an organization. The challenge is that as we continue, this is what's in orange here, this is the unacceptable gap. This is not acceptable to senior leadership because it is far away from the expectations and the plans of the organization. And so by understanding the data and by analyzing the data, what we can figure out is, let's figure out a way to insert an inflection point. Now, an inflection point, this is a behavioral nudge. If business is going in one direction, what do I have to do in order to incent people to change their behaviors, to focus on those soft areas of the business that still can make a difference? And this is the concept of the behavioral nudge in order to augment people's performance. Now, the one thing that I will say when I'm looking at expectations and introducing a nudge by introducing an inflection point is, so I'm looking at data, and I'm looking at a lot of data. And the data, candidly, I mean, sometimes it'll make sense and sometimes it won't make sense. And so one of the principles by applying behavioral nudges, particularly in quote-to-cash outcomes, is this concept of sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity analysis is the idea that's helping people understand relationships between potentially dissimilar items. And one of the best ways to illustrate this is, here's the situation. In the summertime, ice cream sales go up. Great. In the summertime, shark attacks go up. So are we to then say, do ice cream sales cause shark attacks? And so this is looking at the sensitivity. And so what we need to understand is the causal versus the correlations. Now, the causal would be, well, you know what, in the summertime, I'm eating a lot more dairy, and as dairy, I'm gaining a lot more weight, and then when I go in the water, the sharks can smell the dairy in my body, and that would be a causal relationship if that were the case. A correlation could be, well, in the summertime, it's hot, and so I'm gonna buy ice cream to cool down. And when it's hot, the kids are on vacation, we go to the beach, and more of us are in the water. And so there's a correlation between people that are in the water and eating ice cream. So when we look at the data, we can't just look at the data to analyze it for data's sake. We have to then say, let's understand the sensitivity. Are the things that we're seeing correlation and causal? And then based on that, we're then able to make the decisions to identify what are those behavioral nudges that we need to insert in order to drive the behaviors to maximize the performance of organizations, as well as to encourage our people to push their boundaries.
Thanks, Jason. I love that example. I think we actually have a picture of a shark eating some ice cream. Let's put some of these concepts into real examples to businesses, right? Which I think will resonate with everybody. So everybody should be familiar with a sales pipeline. You've got opportunities that go from certain stages. It's important to know the flow of the deals in the pipeline, because ultimately Wall Street wants to know, are you going to hit your numbers? Are you going to exceed your numbers? Are you going to miss? Do I need to do something to make sure that we hit our numbers, right? So let's take a basic example. So every single company has their own sales process. What the stages that you see on top here: prospect, qualify, propose, negotiate, and close. Basic stages, but they should resonate with what everybody has. And there's expected close rates. Now, if we assume in each section of the funnel, right? Let's say there's $40 million of opportunities. The weighted funnel is just the 10% times the 40, the 25% times the 40, et cetera. So if someone said, hey, are we going to hit the number for the quarter? This is what's in the pipeline for Q2. The factored funnel would basically come out to $120 million. It's just the sum of each factored section of the funnel. Not a lot of statistical analysis here, just basic math, but it's pretty accurate, right? You're saying, I think X% is going to close in each deal. Now, to introduce a little bit of bias, because Jason talked about bias, typically what companies do is they say, okay, so I use what was in my CRM system. Let me go talk to the people that actually are living this in the field, right? So I'll go talk to my sales director who says, I don't think it's 120, it's $90 million. I'll go talk to somebody in finance, they say it's $100 million. I talk to the sales VP, they say $125 million. Then they talk to the eager beaver salesperson who's ready to go to Hawaii for President's Club, and they're saying, no, we're gonna do 165. With modeling, you basically talk to the operations person, the financial person who's probably gonna do a little bit more work, and they come up with a number that's a little bit closer, 104 million. So you remember the factored funnel said 120. So how do we do something like this? There's a concept called Monte Carlo, and we're not talking about Monte Carlo on the French Riviera. We're talking about statistical modeling, right? So Monte Carlo modeling is about using regression analysis and probability analysis to map out multiple scenarios which get you much closer to an expected outcome. So what does that mean? In the example we showed before with the factored funnel, you were basically just taking all the deals in the pipeline, adding them up, and putting them together. With Monte Carlo, what you would do is say, there's differences in deals, right? So deals in North America might close 80% quicker than deals across the world. In South America, you might have certain deals in certain countries that have a higher value than what the model said. Europe might be different, Asia might be different, et cetera. So you put all these different factors into a model, and rather than just using a couple of inputs, you run a simulation, right? So a simulation basically means you're gonna run a model 500 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Doesn't really matter, but you run it, a lot of times so that you get probability values that are much more accurate. The model will then come back and say, here's what a normal distribution looks like. I took all the deals in your pipeline, all these different inputs by country, by rep that you gave me. I ran it 1,000 times, and basically what I can now tell you is I'm 100% certain that you will do no worse than $54 million, right? And the model is very accurate because it's all statistics. I'm 80% confident that you're gonna get to $104 million, and I'm about 60% confident that you'll get to 115. And I can pretty much guarantee you that Johnny on the spot, who's thinking he's gonna go to Hawaii for club, we're not gonna get to $134 million, right? So if you think about this, the factored funnel said we were gonna get to 120, yet the model's saying, I'm only 60% confident that you're gonna get there, right? So why is that critical? Because now I know, crap, there is risk to hitting the number in a certain quarter, right? So what Jason talked about before was the behavioral nudges. So now how can I apply this to sales compensation? I go back and look at my data and I realize, hey, product A that is typically in late stages, this stage is negotiation stage, I have data that says this product in certain countries closes very quickly when we roll out certain spiffs, right? So a behavioral nudge could be a spiff, right? Hey, let's pay everybody $10,000 if they close these type of products in the quarter. Typically, those spiffs are rolled out globally, right? Now the data is able to tell us, guess what? You're wasting money. Just roll them out in these specific countries. It doesn't work in Germany. It doesn't work in the United States. Just do France and Argentina. So now I can get much more specific. I can motivate people to drive the behavior that I want, and the model will say, now I'm more accurately going to hit my number for the quarter. So again, very cool way to run very specific analysis that will help you achieve specific outcomes.
That's great. The one thing that I love about this, am I still on? Okay, good. Hey, the one thing I love, okay, so if you've ever run models, right? So we talk data science, whatever. The one thing you know, if you ever run a model in your organization, the one thing you know with 100% certainty is that the output of that model is wrong, right? You know 100% the one thing you can say is it's wrong. Now the question is it a little wrong or is it very wrong? Am I off by a couple dollars? Am I off by hundreds of millions of dollars? And so what Pablo talked about by associating the risk level to this is that by leveraging Monte Carlo simulations against your quote to cash data, what this allows you to do, and against all your enterprise data, it allows you not only to model it, to understand the sensitivity, to see the correlations versus the causal relationships, it allows you to model the propensity of risk. And so if you're a risk-loving person versus a risk-averse person, you can determine, do I want to forecast with 80% level of confidence, 50%, 20% outlier, but maybe I'm just a gambler? And it's those decisions that then give you the insight to the performance of the organization. And once you have that, you then identify it to say, okay, well, what do I need to do to motivate people, and what are the softest segments of the business in order to introduce those nudges, those incentives in order to change people's behavior. And so I'll end this up by quoting the chief data architect over at Deloitte that says, when the ultimate goal is behavioral change, it's the marriage of predictive analytics, the data science, and the science of behavioral nudges that can serve as two parts that work in tandem of the greater, larger whole. And so with that said, thank you for attending this, because we are done with Accelerate. Yay. Thanks, guys.